I was just finished listening to your what was it? Mission of God for the Family. Are you talking about repentance?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was just listening to that. I just finished up listening to it. It was like 15 minutes on your
Yep.
Substack.
That's
It's
what I've
really
been
good.
doing. Of 15, 12 to 18 minutes on just some aspect of the family. I've been talking about parenting right now. So what are kind of the basics of like on the ground parenting. So hopefully it's helpful to people. I mean, getting good feedback. It's funny, you sort of see, I just found out yesterday that I can look at where people are from
Yeah.
that are signing up. So a lot of people, here in Washington, and then Tennessee, got a bunch of people that have signed up from Tennessee, which has been, that's super fun. And then uh, Australia, got a bunch of people in Australia listening to my Substack. A lot of
I
people in
might.
Africa in listening to the Substack. So yeah, it's cool.
How many of those do you have left to do? Are you going to stay on that topic?
I've probably got another 20 and then
Oh,
I'll
really?
be done. So I'll probably hit around 60 total on the family. So
Just trying to figure out.
it's
Go
one of
ahead.
those things I've been studying for years and years. And so I just took my notes and put them all into one spot and organized them organized them by topic. And now I'm just going through what it is. So right now it's, what does it look like to imitate God the Father as a parent? Right.
Oh
So,
boy, those are going to hurt. Those are
but
going to hurt.
they're good though, and
No,
I,
I'm
I
sure.
do think, that we forget that that parenting is an imitation game, and we start looking for methods and methodologies rather than family resemblance. Right? And family resemblance, I think, that's the good news of sanctification, is that the longer you're in the family, the more you come to resemble the father, resemble your older brother Jesus, and that sanctification story um, is embedded into creation, right? It's not it's a supernatural work in the sense that God is doing it and he's not natural, but it is an actual, it's also sort of a natural order work. Being a part of a family, you take on family resemblance, and Jesus talks about it a number of times. You'll be like your Father in heaven. um, you'll do this and you're becoming like your Father in heaven. Paul talks about being a part of the family of God and the change that it has on us. So this family resemblance is something that we're going to take on, and that's presented as just, I think, a part of the good news of adoption, a good news of, it's part of the good news of justification, is that sanctification comes with it. So taking those principles and thinking, well, if that's how the world works, how do we cut with the grain as parents, lean into that, and for the benefit of our kids? So that's kind of the parenting section that we're talking about. So, and we get down into the details of what does it actually look like to confess our sins? What does it actually look like to be kind to the unthankful? As it says, if you want to be like your Father in heaven, be kind to the unthankful, Jesus says in Luke.
Mm,
You go,
mm,
oh, well, if that doesn't apply to parenting, I don't know what does.
yeah.
So yeah. So yeah, I'm having a good time, and you don't get a ton of feedback in this sort of with this sort of thing. So you sort of throw it out into the void, and then every once in a while you run into somebody and they say, "Oh my gosh, we're getting so much out of it." So
That's why I think So the conversation, I find a lot of people actually do find value in those conversations, especially those ones who are the kind of people we want to reach that have, one kid, maybe two, married for like 4 years or 3 or 4 years, and trying to figure out how to manage your family. And I remember when we had Alex, I was disciplined and spanked, and I had parents who were not going to play that. And by the time I had Alex, our first kid, for whatever reason, the process of when to initiate spanking, I didn't know when, okay, right? Like, when do you start? Like, is it one? Is it like two? Like, when do you start doing this? And so, it was Kirk Cameron actually that helped remind me, like, here's a good time to start doing it. I remember, uh, I was in his kitchen, and he's like, I was telling him kind of what was going on, what I was working through, and he's like, "Oh, I'll be right back." Yo, he came back from the garden with a switch. And he's like, "Take this home. It's gonna change your life." And I was like, "I know what this is. I hate these things. I still have horrible memories of these things. Changed my life for sure."
Right.
Um, and and I was like, "Oh yeah, duh." And he's like, "First time obedience." It's like, "Oh yeah, that's right. I know this." And it was just really good to have somebody remind me of that process. And it was just really helpful. But the thing that I was gonna say is, uh, I posted on X that the politics that we are in is a reflection, a report card of what happens in our homes.
Right.
And so when we start talking about, these are not the sexy conversations and policy and all that stuff like that, because I think it's proven we're not really ready to have those conversations because we don't know how to discipline our own houses very well at all. We don't know how to raise our kids. And I basically said that the home is the seed in which good policy for nations are created and cultivated. And so we are seeing our report card, and this isn't something that we think we can fix our report card by saying, yeah, we had a failing grade, and go back and turn that F into just a little A with a little line. And it's like, no, you're actually going to have to go and study. You're going to have to go and learn. You're going to have to go through the hard things in order to be able to to earn that A on the report card. And that might take 20, 30 years to pull out of this. And so that's why when we're talking about raising children, we're actually not just having a separate conversation from culture, society, and politics. We're actually talking about the same thing, but it's just not as sexy to a lot of people to talk about that, right?
Yeah. Well,
And
and I
go
think
ahead.
too, we have um we have turned the discussion, we say things like politics is downstream from culture, so we need to change culture. But culture is an abstraction. It's not. Jesus didn't die for cultures. Um, Culture is the mass habits of a group of people. Um, so
Mm.
if you say politics is downstream from culture, but then you never say, well, where is culture downstream from? What is culture? How is it, and say, so I've seen people arguing about, this culture or that culture can be redeemed and can't be redeemed. And I was like, well, gee, but Jesus didn't die for culture. He died for people. He died for families. He died for nations. He died for objective covenant groups, like, tribes. You think so? That's actually probably um, less sexy than culture, trying to fix the culture, but you don't have access to the culture, right? That there's no direct access to the culture. And so we have arguments about where does this culture come from? What causes this culture? And but what we have access to is our kids. we, we have access to our families. We have
Okay,
access
so
to
work
churches.
with me, real quick. So I understand this. So culture is a product of what happens out of the family, right? Cult, right? It's other
Yeah,
society, right?
out of the family, out of the church, out of the schools, out of the neighborhoods.
It's how people interact with each other together and their idiosyncrasies. Fair enough.
Yeah, what's it as on average, right? It's average,
Mm.
the way average averages work. So it's like saying, um, you say, well, this culture does this, and if you say, well, but that guy doesn't do that, you say, well, but culture
In
is an
general.
average in general, right? So yeah,
Right.
so it's an abstraction into it's a description of an abstraction. So the culture itself is not a thing. The culture itself is taken from the thing.
It's a
Uh,
reflection of the thing, maybe?
yeah, maybe a reflection of the thing. But if you say, well, here's a reflection of this thing on the mirror, and you start drawing on the mirror to fix the thing, to fix the reflection, then you've actually missed the point. And culture is that kind of abstraction. And the conservative movement in particular talks a lot about the we've got to fix the culture, we've got to change the culture, move the culture, or protect the culture, all sorts of things. We're in a culture war, for the culture, but then we focus on changing, on redrawing the reflection rather than focus on the thing itself. So at
Okay,
least
so
that's how I see it.
I think I'm tracking with you. So then you're not arguing that. So, is it fair to ask then what changes culture, or is that like not the conversation? Is that not the
Well,
right
I mean,
question?
I guess it'd be fair to ask that, but I don't think you actually. I mean, if your goal, if what you care about is changing the culture, you're probably never going to get there, right? Because you uh, you have to actually focus on the thing itself. So if you say, okay, we've got a culture problem, um, and you don't say, and that doesn't lead you to say, how do I love my kids better, engage in my neighborhood better, engage with my church better, engage in the engage with my neighbors better. It never gets to the thing itself, away from the abstraction, which is the people made in the image of God. It's like trying to say, we're gonna fix these statistics. Well,
Mm.
if the goal is to fix the statistics, then you end up thinking about how do we count it different? We got to fix we've got to change these statistics. So, well, maybe we should redraw the lines of the county. That'll fix
That's
the statistics, but it
yes.
doesn't change anything.
So do you know, like, so then when people are coming in and saying we want to change culture, what do you think they mean?
Um, I think
Okay, let me
often I
ask it
don't.
like this. Let me ask it
Yeah.
like this. Um, when liberals decided that they wanted to see a different outcome in society, what do you think they attacked?
Well, they went after the institutions, right? So they went after control of the institutions, the educational institutions. So think about it this way. So um, the communists in the 70s, they wanted to, they wanted to win New York. They started art schools, and they started sponsoring, or they started um, comedy clubs. They started there's a really famous I think it was called the Brooklyn School of Modern Art. It's not there anymore, but it trained um, it went out and got the people that were good at graffiti and offered them a free art education, right? And it ended up producing famous artists, famous, a lot of the people that then are designing, the covers for CDs and records and things, and as well as a lot of the people that were running the major design firms out of New York, right? So, and New York, San Francisco, um, the LA, to a lesser extent, a lot of the design comes out of those particular areas, the design that the rest of the country ends up following. Well, the other thing that they did was promote LGBTQ in that art school. So they end up having a huge influence on fashion, on art, on design, on all of these different areas of life, on the visual landscape of America, by gathering up really great artists, giving them a free education, and making sure they're pro-gay in the process, right? And it's a different way. They went after the actual people that they knew would be influential on people. So they end up, quote unquote, winning the culture war, but they didn't do it by going after the culture. Conservatives have been on the defense, and so we look around after we lose a battle and we say, "Oh man, how do we get that field back?" Right? We've lost that field, but we lost the field because we actually didn't send an army into it, right? We didn't send artists, we didn't send comedians, we didn't send storytellers into the battle. We didn't go, we founded Hollywood and then they took it over. We founded the universities and then they took them over. We founded even the public school system, depending on where you were, sometimes it was founded by progressives in some states. In some states, it was conservatives. But they definitely went after the institution of the school system. Right? So, because that's where the people are formed, right? People are formed by institutions. The institutions we still have control of are our families, hopefully our churches, although, that is something, but
according to Megan Basham, those guys are for sale.
I know. So, well, we've got, but institutions form individuals, but we don't really start institutions even, right? We still, send our kids into their institutions, and sometimes, our kids can come through and they come out fine and they're effective, and that's not the issue. But if we aren't thinking in terms of using the institutions God established well, right, by faith, family, church, state, civic sphere, and then using our individual our self-government, I guess you'd say, using that well, and then forming institutions, starting institutions, then we're not on the road back yet, right? That's when we know we're on the road back, is when we're forming institutions, right? We form podcasts to complain about Hollywood movies. We don't start studios. And the studios, the studios, they don't form people by releasing movies. They form the people that are in the studio, who then go out and start more studios. Right? We think that the most effective aspect of we think that the most human forming aspect is the movie that we release, but it's actually the people that work in the studio, right? This is why it's so important that we're starting businesses, because this is all a long game, right? You don't win back, you don't lose a long game war and then win it back quickly. You got to be on the long game. Owning and operating and running a business forms your employees. Those employees grow up, own, operate, run businesses. They have families, right? You have these discipleship opportunities when you run a business that you don't have any other place. You produce a widget. The widget doesn't change the society. The people that you disciple go out and start businesses that disciple people, that start businesses that disciple people. That changes society. It's got to be a long game, but institutions form people, form and reform people, and other things don't. It's just it's hard to get that through our heads because it's so anti-Gnostic and the opposite of the way we think as moderns
You can't
and
just throw a sentence
postmoderns.
out. You can't just throw a sentence out like that and not break it all the way down. Nope. 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 You can't just throw out these words. No, I have so many questions. So wait. What do you mean that it's anti-Gnostic? Or because you gotta work that through because I have so many questions on this other stuff. But we keep drilling down. Keep going.
Okay. So so Gnosticism, one of the things that it promotes as an ideology, so ideology tends to be Gnostic. So ideology means when you have one idea and all other things are interpreted in relation to that one idea. So that's what an ideology is, when a single idea is the interpretive framework. Ideologies tend to be Gnostic, right? But they also tend to be anti-institutional in the sense that what forms us is we get ideas in our head and they work their way out. And if we can change the ideas in a person's head, then we have changed the person. That if we have a religious Gnosticism gives the right idea in our head, gives us direct access to the divine. And so we don't need the institution anymore. So the institution is for the weak, because once you have the right ideas, once you've achieved a certain level, then the institution isn't needed for you anymore because you've already got the ideas all worked out. Well, the scriptures tell us that God transforms us by means of institutions, right? That we are parented into the faith, right? That we are.
He gives us institutions that develop us into the people we need to be.
Exactly. Yeah, we're pastored into the faith, right? And I think there's a real way that the civic realm can have a discipling effect. It does have a discipling effect,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. It disciples wicked doers not to do wickedness, and
right.
and rewards good people for doing good, right? So it's
right. So when it's working right, it's discipling us towards righteousness. So stripes on the back of a fool. Stripes on the back of a fool make the foolish wise, right?
Yeah.
And it's not just the fool that receives the stripes,
wisdom,
although hopefully it is, but it's the people that see it as well, right? So when you have a city that's hard on murderers, you have fewer murderers, right? So that sort of thing. So but that's institutional. The institutional individuals are formed by institutions, and then individuals run institutions, right? But it rarely is discipleship a simple one-on-one transaction between adults, right? There is some of that, and I think that's good, and that's called friendship usually. I mean, the reason we have a lot of counseling now is because the normal friendship of society has broken down. So very few people have the kinds of friends they can tell all of their troubles to and trust them with it, right? Or trust them to get good advice. And so we have professional friends, counselors, who are going to be on your side because that's their job, right? So and it's not wrong to have a counselor, go to a counselor, but it's evidence of a social issue in society, of an institutional breakdown. But Gnosticism is anti-institutional, and so it comes along and says, well, what we need to do is get the facts and the data out there in the right sort of way, and that will change society. We don't have to start institutions. If we can just lodge the right facts and data in people's heads, then then we'll get the outcome that we need. And while we're doing that, the people actually teaching Gnosticism, the communists, have been out there overtaking the institutions that previous non-Gnostic conservatives started. So I think we need to be thinking institutionally a lot more. And even
So
when you say, we need to think institutionally, that sounds like a bad thing.
well, you're making the argument that for me, as I'm looking around, I'm like, what are some of the most form shaping institutions in the last 20 years? And I would say social media. Would they be
Social media.
considered institutions?
I would say that social media is kind of it's probably more of a Gnostic attempt to get hold of
Mm.
the information highways. So it's like being able to control which phones ring from whom.
Are you saying they're like the bandits on the road? Social media is like the bandits on the road between institutions?
I think that's how it's functioning. I don't think it has to, because you've seen X explode in its influence by opening things up, right? And there's a lot of possibilities on how to use it,
That's
but
interesting.
it's more
I think
like
the
the
way you're saying
roads
is
between
good.
institutions.
That so the lines of communication more than an institution itself.
Right. Now, you look at the way Google as a company has how much it reformulated the way the world thought about what a company should be. Think of all of the startups that thought, we probably need a ping pong table when we're getting a startup, right? And that work should be fun, and work should, you have 40 hours and you should be able to get your work done in 20 and play at work the other 20, right? That was because of the way Google as a company ran. They reformulated the way people thought about business. And what it did was it defanged the competition. Right? Google defanged the competition by putting out, here's how we run our company. Look how successful we are. Here's how we run our company. And all of these startups thought, oh, well, what we need to do is we get a bunch of money, and then we start that kind of, we worry about that kind of way that people can be at our company. And that way, people are only working 20 hours a week and all of this. And then nobody could compete, because that's not what Google was like when it started. Right. But they basically paid a bunch of people full-time salaries to work half-time, so that the expectation of Silicon Valley would change, so that everybody was working half-time and nobody would ever compete with Google. Brilliant, kind of evil. But
they actually got a hold of the institutions that transformed the people that then transformed to other institutions.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or
and
culture,
so
should I say? Should be culture.
Expectations. Yeah. They transform the culture, or the cultural expectations, maybe, right? So that now you've got a bunch of people in there. And so there's some really funny episodes of Parks and Rec about this, where they're about what startups spend their money on. But what's brilliant about it is they said, if everybody expects to work part-time, I mean, I don't know if they said this out loud or not, but this was the effect it had. If everybody expects to get full-time pay for part-time work, then you're not going to have any companies that build from the ground up, that come out of the garage anymore, because that takes a mindset of 60 to 80 hours a week. You're always on in a startup, right? You work so many hours, you pour it in, and then eventually you hope that it pays off, but it's a huge amount of energy to get up the hill. They sucked all the energy out of the room by changing the expectations for the next generation of employees. And you stopped getting the kind of
entrepreneurial attitude
attitude that, yeah. So and that's actually not a good thing for society as a whole, but it is a good thing for a certain kind of fascist mindset, which is what Google, Facebook, early Twitter, they had that kind of fascist mindset that that you have the people at the top, and then you have the masses that you sell to, and the people at the top, they're at the top, and so they should be able to control information. They should be able to control, right? You can't trust the normal people, and so you work with the government to get the right people, the influence and stuff like that.
That's how come the cry for fascism hasn't come out as hard on those guys? You know, like that would be. I mean, that is pure fat. It's close to pure fascism, right?
Well,
You know,
they denied it for a long time, but that was the weird thing about the Facebook, the letter that Zuckerberg put out when he was like,
yes,
"Well, I now regret
having
what
done
we
that.
did to help Biden get elected.
Hmm.
I didn't get what was going on," and it's possible he didn't get what was going on.
I believe him. I really do
Yeah,
believe him because yeah, I really do believe him. I'll take him at his word that he didn't get what was going on because he wasn't the only one. There's a lot of people who had been trained over the years to think about their government in a particular type of way. And I think he thought that this is good. They got all the information. I trust these institutions.
right. Why? It's the CIA. Why would they lie to me?
Why would they lie? Yeah. Yeah. The
Or was it the
FBI wouldn't
FBI?
just come
Yeah,
come to somebody's house. It was FBI.
is the FBI. Yeah, they
Yeah.
wouldn't just show up at the door without good reason. They're
Right.
trying to protect us from something that, and then like, wait, they lied to us. Now what do you do? You know, and I think that's the situation he found himself in. And hopefully, and I do think Elon has had a huge effect by starting institutions. Um, and you see the effect that he has on things like this, on Zuckerberg saying, "Oh shoot, here this is what I did. I don't think I should have done that." He wouldn't have done that had Elon not bought X, because now he sees, uh, um, he sees a way out of the the mimetic system as
Interesting.
it would have been.
I think Elon is definitely a huge part of the help of that. I think also there's another institution, the jujitsu and the mixed martial arts and his relationships with um, the guys in that culture. Um, I think they've had a huge impact. It's something about a guy once he starts gets punched in the face that I think develops a certain sort of way to think about things strategically, and it wakes him up. He's different after that.
Yeah,
And so he started becoming. This is why I always like to remind people that when we're fighting battles with insanity, literally people calling themselves a woman when they're a man and all this stuff like that. Like we don't have to really trip out too much because reality really is gonna be on our side.
yeah, it's
And
gonna
so
catch up.
it's gonna catch up, and there's gonna be and so it's only gonna get crazier. And the more sane we stay, they're gonna say, my arms can flap so fast I can fly. It's like, bro, try it if you want. Like that's not gonna happen. It's not gonna happen.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you though, it seems all of our institutions drift left and never go right. They never come, if they go left, they never come back. They always are drifting left. We don't seem to anchor our institutions very well in the right side of the conversation. We always drift left. We always fall prey to liberalism, at least that I can think of. Why?
I remember, um so I got saved into the PC USA, and it was the 90s. Um Baptized in 1995. I was a late high school kid, and I had really good pastors, a whole series of them. And I was sitting with one of them, and he said, um, when he was the first pastor that sat me down and said, "I think you might be called into the ministry." But he said, "Here's the deal. Let me tell you about what's going on. The PCUSA is being lost." And he said, "We're about to vote on on whether or not to allow open homosexuals to into the ministry. And he said, my presbytery is going to vote yes. He said, I think we might not vote yes in the whole country yet, but it's coming, because what's going to happen is when this presbytery votes yes, everyone that votes no is going to run away. He said, so he said, so he drove to every church in the presbytery and talked to every single pastor and argued with them, you have to vote against this. We have to vote against this. And he said he was thrown out of many of the churches for it. But he said, I'm going to make them kick me out. He said, and they will. They'll kick me out eventually. And they did. It was heroic of him, though, because he knew that he said, but you should not get on a sinking ship. You should find a different denomination. So, which was wise advice. But he also, he said, find a place where they allow you to they allow you to preach the gospel, and you don't have to fight over the authority of the Bible. You don't have to fight over, male and female and marriage and things like that. Find a place where they and he said, he said, what I did was I was so focused on evangelizing my town that I stopped going to presbytery. So 6 years didn't go to presbytery. And then all of a sudden I see, here's what we're voting on. He said, how did we get here? And he's like, I wasn't involved in the institutional health. I had retreated from the institutional health, and he was regretting it. And so he was doing everything he could to do what was right, putting miles and miles and miles on his car to try and fight for the institutional health. But he said, we've never seen a denomination yet come back from liberalism. And he said, but it's because we think if we flee the institution that we'll be okay. But he's right. We haven't really seen that. It looked like the SBC was going to be won back, and it still might be. Right, there's a fight
They're
going on there.
in the middle of their fight, that's for sure.
That attempt to, in Spokane, all of the churches that wanted to stay strong in the PCUSA, they lost. As soon as they lost the vote, they ran for it. Right now, Machen got kicked out, and so that's a different sort of thing. And there's a getting kicked out is, I think, is fine and worthy. But then he went and started another institution because he understood that he understood that liberalism was Gnosticism and that you had to fight it by not being Gnostic, right? If you read Christianity and Liberalism, he talks over and over about the importance of the historical reality of everything, of all of that the doctrines grow out of the historical events, right? He's very anti-Gnostic.
Yeah, that's interesting when you say that. I've listened to that part over and over and over again. Explain what you mean. Like, okay, what is the difference between what you just, like, of course they grow out the historical event. What are you talking about?
Well, so the liberalism at his time was saying, well, it's not important whether or not it happened because it's the ideas that are important. It's the morals that are important, not the historical events. So they could deny that Jesus did miraculous things, and that they said the miraculous stories grew up because the morality was so good that they said, well, it must have come from a divine source. And so they reimagined Jesus with a mythology of a divine source, but it didn't matter because it was true.
Kind of like taking the fruit without the root, basically.
Right. That's what they were trying to do. Well, it started with denying truth to the beginning of Genesis, denying truth to Exodus, right? And eventually it got to Jesus. But the cosmological assumptions made it such that the conservatives didn't fight for the historicity of Genesis, of Adam and Eve. They didn't fight there. By the time it got to Jesus, they were in over their heads, right? They'd been so, and you see this all the time with people that say, well, biblical scholars, will say this. So,
When I was going, when I was going to seminary, one of the areas that I saw taken exception of more than any other area was the 6-day creation. That was I saw so many guys come through and take. Well, I take exception there. It's
right.
Like, whoa, really?
But it's even in conservative circles, it's a respectable place. And what I've seen is the people that don't often feel embarrassed that they're not taking an exception, right? That they have been so they'll say, well, look, I am not a fundamentalist. I am not a Dr. Dinosaur 6-day creationist, right? I'm not a crazy person, but I do think that you should interpret it this way. The Bible, I do think that that's what the Bible teaches, but I'm not trying to divide the church, right? What that means is the left came in and effectively defined the terms of the debate as you've got crazy whack job fundamentalists that like religious violence over there believing in 6-day creation. And then you've got reasonable, rational, scholarly people over here that deny it. And you can choose which one of those you want to be and still love Jesus. It doesn't affect your love of Jesus because that's, a different subject, a different topic.
Secondary issues. Yeah.
Secondary issues. And they've effectively set the terms of the debate. And so now I like to say, yep, I am a fundamentalist. Sure, I don't care. But that you don't have to be a jerk, right? And you don't have to be divisive, but you don't have to accept the terms of the debate either, right? You don't have to accept the terms that way. So, when because people will like to ask, well, why? I mean, how can you, be that way and be that kind of person? And so the way I like to frame the debate is, well, when I look around at the world, it looks like the kind of place that would be created out of a poem. It looks like that's the kind of place I see when I look around. And so then when you go to Genesis and it says God created the world out of the world is the expression of a 6-stanza poem of creative force. So that makes perfect sense to me. I don't understand the push for a world filled with death and destruction and despair for millions of years. This just doesn't look like that kind of place, right? That it's a cosmological starting point assumption that doesn't look like reality. But the guys that made that argument originally were guys that didn't like Jesus, but they were respectable, H.G. Wells or something. You got some respectable guy that says, well, Jesus is not that important to society. So this all the Nietzscheans. So it's and then they back into the story of evolution that way. Hitler, he dedicated Mein Kampf to Nietzsche when he wrote it and thought of himself as Nietzsche's hero, right? But that idea that the world is the history of the world is the story of heroes that pull themselves
Mm.
above everyone else, um, and then lead the world, is that kind of is a is a particular understanding of the cosmos that is a power based world rather than a beauty based world system. Um, and I just know too much history to believe that this could possibly be a power-based system, because everybody that hunts out hunts for the power to control and manipulate is destroyed by the hunt. All of the great stories, all of the classics, pagan and non pagan and Christian alike, agree that the guy that hunts for power will be destroyed by the power. Right? That's something that we've seen all along. And but the guy that seeks to fill the world with beauty ends up with a lot more influence than the guy that hunts for the power. So I look at it all and say, well, so 6-day creation this makes sense. The other one makes no sense. It's senseless um, compared to the experience of the human race in the world. So
I wasn't trying to get you. You get all turned up about. I get you talking about creation. No, I was. So I want to get back to the drift of institutions. That was one example of kind of the. So you got that. So we lose part of. So maybe define this. We start to lose our institutions when we give up historical realities and make them mental ascension pieces. How does that work? So because I'm trying to get the examples of history versus idealism, and Christianity is a history, a real history, versus what are we seeing in idealism? That what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, if you look at like the history of Disney as a company, Walt Disney himself, he loved the American way. He loved,
Capitalism.
He hated communism.
Yep.
And the way that it destroyed things that he loved, like
people.
Yeah. He loved his people. He loved nations. He loved his employees. He was a good boss, and he actually spoke to the Congress because he had tried to approach people and say, "You guys, the communists are after Hollywood. I'm seeing it happen right in front of me. Right?
They're made an MPA.
Right?
The Motion Picture Association was made by him, John Wayne, Reagan. These were guys who were trying to stop and there was out to uproot all the socialists that were inside of the industry.
Right, which it's ironic, I think, that the communists went after Hollywood because it was a hugely successful capitalist endeavor.
What other company could they suck from? Like, if you're going to drain a host, you want to find the healthiest host you possibly can.
Exactly. So, did you see the Coen Brothers movie, Hail Caesar?
No, I wanted to see that one.
It's about some communists trying to take over Hollywood. It's so funny. It's really good. But my wife and I went and saw it in the theater, and we were laughing, and we were laughing so loud, and all the people around us were like, "I don't get these jokes," but it's all these like references to the Communist Manifesto, and this, you had to be educated enough to get the jokes. There's this really funny scene where Jesus is on the cross in a production, and all you can see is his feet because the camera's down here, and so they keep walking, and the guy with the lunches walks in, and he says, "Hey, got 2 lunches here. Got lunches for extras, and I got lunches for the premium cast, or the central cast." He's passing them out, and he looks up at Jesus, and he says, He says, "Are you central?" And Jesus says, "I have no idea."
Now I know why I
It's
didn't
like
see it.
this moment of like what it's brilliant. It's a really brilliant scene because you have Jesus saying, "I don't know if I'm central here."
Mm, mm.
But it's really good. They're really smart. I don't know their story or anything, but
The
they're
Coen brothers?
yeah, the Coen brothers.
You guys are super smart.
Yeah.
They bother
So
me.
but the the idea that so I think we think, well, if you stories are really powerful, and so I'm gonna go out and tell stories because I like power. Um, you actually don't end up having very influential or important stories to tell. Um, because it really is an the storytelling institution is the powerful thing. Um, it's telling 100 stories and affecting the way all
Mm.
of those people go out and start institutions is the powerful thing. And telling stories that serve an audience so that your institution is healthy and you can continue hiring people and training people and um, being good as a business is makes you influential, not telling a good, not sending out a movie. Um, eh, so it's because because you form people, and then as a parent, what stories you bring into your family is it affects the institution and the institutional effectiveness of your family to raise children. And so it's not that stories aren't important, but stories in and of themselves aren't the important thing.
It's how
It's
the family
stories.
uses the it's
It's
how
how
the
the
institution
family
uses it. Okay.
how the institution exactly, yeah. Whether it's a business, whether so the story that a business tells about itself is really important, not because the story itself is going to be important when separated from the institution. um
Matter of
so,
fact, that's something that, right now working at the Don't Creative Agency, one of the things that Darren does when he comes into a company is he's refocusing how they see themselves, and the story they first start telling is a story of who they are. Because believe it or not, that's the thing that comes out of you, right? That you don't have, that
right.
everybody else sees and like, I want to be like that, right? That's the driving thing. Anyway, you were going. I can talk about that
Yeah.
forever, but keep going.
Well, yeah, so I just have I have thought a lot about this because as we've gone around raising money for lore, um we have people that say, "Oh man, stories are so important for the culture," or "We've got to fight for this culture," and but I've seen, but all of the people that talk that way haven't been effective to make any sort of move, and so it's made me think a lot about these things, and I think the Gnosticism gets in our way when we abstract culture out into something that you can affect on its own. And
So then, going back to history versus liberalism. History versus liberalism. You were
yeah,
using, you were talking about Disney in that way.
right. So Disney, what Walt Disney did was he protected his company, and when they wanted to unionize, he just he went to them and said, "Do you understand what happens if you unionize?" Right? Because he knew that the communists were using unions as a lever. Unions are an institution, right? The communists,
Mm.
but what they thought is it can be a lever that we'll use to get our ideas of they can be used to implement our ideas, which is the rivalry between the worker and the boss, right? The worker and the boss have to become rivals for communism to work,
Hold
and
on,
so
hold on.
the
Oh, hold
unions are
on.
used to lever that.
Hold on. That's I'm just having a breakthrough. So what they do is they go and create an institution, in order to train the people to think about their boss in a particular type of way.
Right.
Now, it's really interesting. So you already have things going on there, right? But the institution that has trained us previously to think about our boss in a particular way was the church.
Right.
The
Yeah.
church was using the fifth commandment and the breakdown of through the Westminster Confession to train us how we should think from slave to master, right? You're in a fatherly way of your boss versus a slave driver way, and so somehow that had broken down in the culture because something was happening. That's really interesting. And then you get a whole nother institution that comes in to replace the church's institution in thinking about this matter through unionizations, through unions, to educate people of what the real story is between their boss and them. I've never put all that together in that way.
Because think about
That's
what would
fascinating.
you
Matter of
if
fact,
you're
I would even say that the family, that's the institution of the family. Ultimately, I think the family and the church help instruct you. Those two institutions instruct you about, because most of the economics is coming out of the family. So they're the ones technically directly responsible to engaging with how you should treat your superior.
Right. Because the church is a non economic institution,
Right.
by design, right? It's a non-economic institution. It's not producing. It is and it actually is important that it remains a non-economic institution, right? That's good for society. And then the civic sphere should also be a non-economic institution, although it protects the space for economics to work and function. So the only economic sphere then is the family, the individual and the family. I mean, that's what economics means is it's a house law. Yeah. So the business is an extension of the family. If you've got an issue between the boss and then the civic sphere, if it's one kind of issue, the civic sphere can step in and judge between it. If it's another kind of issue, the church, the ecclesiastical sphere can step in and judge between it. But the goal is, in all of those ways, is to remove the rivalry so that the boss is paying a fair wage or not taking advantage. Right? It is treating them like family, right? Treating them the way that you should treat family, and not breaking the law, right? So those are good things. And then that the employee is not stealing, is showing respect and putting others' needs above their own. When the boss and the employees are both considering others as more important than themselves, you have really well functioning businesses that make huge impact in the world and bless a lot of people and provide for a lot of people. I remember when my dad owned a company, and he said that one of the most stressful things to think about was how many children depended upon their dads that worked for him. Right? So he had to do his job well to make sure these dads could make sure that their children were well taken care of. And so he saw that was his job as a boss, was to provide a way for these dads to provide for their kids. So he had to do his job well, right? When everybody's thinking that way, and you don't have a rivalry, but you see that we're in this together, right? That this is a partnership issue. You have some amazing things, transformative things happen in the world. And when it breaks down into rivalry from either direction, when you've got bosses that see their employees as human capital to be used up, and they don't see them as human anymore, that causes one particular kind of problem. And then when the employee sees their boss as the enemy, that they anything that they can pull over on him, that causes a different kind of problem. But well-functioning institutions are a huge blessing, and this is why something like Chick-fil-A, the kids that get hired into it have high success rates, because they have a very loving attitude towards their employees that wants to train them up to be effective the way the world works. So they think in terms of family. And the guy that started Chick-fil-A said that his goal in the world was to train young people how to be good in business, and chicken sandwiches was the means that he uses to train young people how to be successful in business. He's thinking about the people, and that successfully making and selling chicken sandwiches gives him that opportunity to think about forming people well. And I find that inspirational.
That's actually the right process to go about. Okay, we keep getting sidetracked on the history versus liberalism.
Yeah.
Keep going. It was so good. I had to keep going there. That's helpful.
So so liberalism, it says that what's important, liberalism in the early 20th century liberalism of the theological liberalism, it said what's important is the abstracted ideas, not the historical facts of the matter. Wait a second.
I'm sorry. As you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself, is this why we're having the fight over the Constitution right now?
I think this is why we're having the fight over the Constitution. This is why we're having the fight over. I think in all the main lines ended up going this direction, right? This is why we're having a fight over women's ordination, right? Well, she's got all the right ideas in her head. What does her body composition? What does her chromosomes have to do?
Oh, Jason, that's so real.
Because the historical facts, the biological facts are dismissed as secondary to the ideas.
Okay, keep going.
But when the gospel comes in, it actually restores us to institutions, but it also restores us to history, right? It restores us, and then it restores us to our bodies as well, right?
How does it? So explain that. How does it do that?
Well,
how does it restore us to history?
It restores us to history because you start to see that God acts within history, whereas Gnosticism and liberalism both dislodge us from history to that God, that the divine mentality lifts us out of history, and so that we no longer are connected to it. So whether it's the Stoicism that says we need to be unaffected by the historical process, or it is that you get an idea that makes it so that you can see that the historical process is an illusion. Any of those ways of approaching it and are actually a Gnostic, a Gnostic approach. And but what we see with Christianity as a historical religion is that God took on flesh at a particular time that was the fullness of time, meaning that all of the historical processes up till that point were necessary and important and a part of God's salvific act, right? It's funny because when you read,
which is why we get genealogies.
Yeah, this is why you get genealogies, right?
Right.
You read Machen, and he says that Jesus was fully aware that he was the Messiah, and you say, well, what is that? Why does he keep making that argument, right? He was conscious of his own messianic mission, and that you can't deny it. But it's historically verifiable that Jesus believed he was the Messiah. And the reason he's making such a big deal out of that is because what they're saying, what the liberals at the time were saying, was that Jesus didn't know he was the Messiah. He was just being a good person, and then the messianic hopes were put onto him. Right? And Machen says, well, no, actually, Jesus was the one who said, hey, put your messianic hopes onto me. Right? I'm the Messiah. And the proofs were the genealogy, the timeline given by Daniel, the timeline given by Isaiah, when you have John the Baptist send his followers to say, okay, I'm in prison. I didn't see this. This wasn't on the bingo card. Isn't that what the kids are saying these days? This wasn't on the bingo card. Here I am in prison. Are you really the Messiah? He quotes a prophecy about the blind are given sight, the lame are walking, the deaf hear. Right? These historical realities that were predicted are now happening in history. Your evidence is a historical act of God, right? A historical act of the divine power transforming the lives of actual people. That's the evidence that he gives John the Baptist that he can continue to trust that Jesus is the Messiah into his head being removed. And so then we say, well, if God is the same yesterday, today, and forever, then where do we expect where do we expect to find God acting? Well, it's in my life, in the actual. So I don't need to be raised above the day-to-day actions of or the day-to-day activity of life, and then see a real spiritual interpretation of them or something like that, right? Or to understand that these things aren't important, but I've got this real spiritual mindset. Instead, we say, well, God acts in the day in, day out life of his people, right? That where do we expect God's gospel to be found? In the words of our mother and father towards us, in the actions of a parent, carrying their child to church, bringing their baby to church. How do we expect God to act? Well, in the historical processes, through the historical processes, we're restored to the normal historical processes, become one of the primary places that God acts and interacts with us. So you don't say, well, I'm just going to launch my kid out into the world and hope for the best. Or you say, well, no, I'm discipling my kid, and that this is the normal way to do it. As we walk along the way, as we rise up, as we lay down, my child is going to be meeting God in the normal historical processes of family life. Those things, the generational relationship is restored because it's a part of the natural order of his moving through history. So that different mindset, where the natural historical order becomes imbued or haunted by the presence of Christ, is good news in a non-Gnostic religion. So that's what the Westminster Confession means when it talks about the normal means of grace. Where are we going to meet God? Well, when we go to church and we hear a sermon, when we go to church and have the sacraments, right? In the baptism, in our own baptism, and in the baptisms that happen within the community, in the Lord's Supper, in the singing in our neighbors singing of the doxology, we can hear the voice of the Spirit preparing our ears to hear and respond to the word, right? It's going to affect our hearts. That's the normal means of grace You don't have to wait around for a spiritual revolution to happen because we're not spiritual communists, right? The normal the normal historical processes are imbued analogically imbued with the activity of the spirit. The spirit is the wind in the sails of history, from the smallest to the largest action.
So when you talk about history, it's funny. I think this is just, maybe it's just me, but talk about history, for whatever reason, I don't count anything that isn't biblical history.
Right.
Right. So when you talk about history, it's like, okay, the stuff that happened in the Bible, but you're making a larger argument about history, which is the work of the Spirit based off of the historical relationships of the story, the reality of that, and the Spirit working through the common everyday living for thousands of years after those events into the present. Is that fair enough to say?
Yeah. So there's a Gnostic view that says so that's the anti-institutionalism of Gnosticism, right? So that says unless it is infallible, it's not a real authority, right? And the Roman Catholic says we believe that, therefore the church has to be infallible, or the Pope has to be infallible to be, and that is what makes him a real authority. And Protestants in America in the present, anti-institutional Protestants will say the church is not authoritative, therefore it's not a real authority in the world. The real authority is Bible.
Is what? Say that part again.
The real authority is the Bible and me, right? That there's a direct connection without an institution between me and the authority.
Well, can I challenge that a little bit? Because how do they they don't believe, I can't believe that, because they're always looking at church councils. They're looking at the church has ruled on this and the church has ruled that, the Nicene Creed, like surely that's not their position, because they're looking at all those pieces to make arguments about what the church is.
Who's making those arguments?
I would say most people, especially the Reformed folks.
Well, right. So there is in the Reformed Church is one of the few places where in America where there is still an understanding of institutional authority, right?
Okay.
The church as a public institution. But it's the
evangelical at large does not have that as a reality. It's
smaller than, I think the Reformed Church is small and not particularly influential.
I think you're right.
As a whole. So it doesn't mean that there isn't, I do think that there are people that still get that, but I think the American church as a whole, I mean, the number of times I talk to people, they're like, oh yeah, totally a Christian. Totally. And then when you say, well, when do you go to church? And they're like, well, I don't really go to church, but I have a really robust relationship with Jesus, so I don't really need the church. I hear that all the time. Or, I have a church that I built out in my backyard, and I go out to it by myself on Sunday morning. And you think, wouldn't you see that's actually not a thing?
Well, I mean, and you got a bunch of people, evangelicals, who are attending church constantly, but still don't believe in the institution itself being a real institution in the world.
Right. Yeah.
That's true.
That it's not a public institution. It doesn't have any sort of public authority. So, but what that means is when it comes down to history, that God was active in biblical times, and he's not active. So he was active such that the Bible could be written. Right, the Bible is the binding documents of an institution. Right, it's the binding documents of a nation.
Wow, we
It
treat the
was the
Bible like
binding
the Constitution, huh?
right. The
Interesting.
Bible is I mean, the Bible was the Constitution of Israel. The the book of Genesis was the constitution of the patriarchy. Right. It's the establishment. It's the binding legal documents of the patriarchy. Then, when the patriarchy was superseded, the the patriarchy was superseded by the nation. Now the patriarchal documents become a subset of the Constitution of the nation, and then
would that be something like the common law in America right now?
Yeah. So, or the Magna Carta,
Magna
I think would
Carta.
be
Yeah.
a good
Okay.
example. So you say,
Yeah.
is the Magna Carta binding? It's like, well, yes and no. Right.
Right.
It's not
Right.
binding, but it's absolutely binding.
Yes.
But it's also not binding. Right.
Right.
It is a really, really important document for the establishment of the common law system, and then the common law system established our system, and that's what's binding.
I got you.
So yeah, so it was still binding in the sense that it's true, and that and it's probably binding a little bit more than so it's binding. It would have been more by the Magna Carta would have been more binding pre-Civil War. Our Civil War was it revolutionized the way we approached even the Constitution, but it revolutionized the way the system of law that our Constitution was existing in. But then you have the histories. So the Pentateuch establishes the nation, and then the histories come along, and they establish they change the nation from a republic sort of organization with layered authorities to a monarchy, right? And so the histories in the Bible establish are the constitution of the monarchy, and then as well as the constitution of the temple, or the establishment of the temple. And then the prophets come in, and they are the constitution of a people in exile. And then the latter prophets are the reconstitution of the nation of Israel. And then the New Testament is the constitution of the international. So all of it included, plus the New Testament, becomes the constitution of the international institution of the church. Right, or the intergalactic, honestly, institution
like
of the
that.
church. Yeah,
Intergalacticism.
Yeah, exactly. So the having an institution that is established by those documents is important, because that institution continues to survive and continues to have non-infallible a non-infallible history of itself, but still a real institutional history of itself. But it's the same with every nation has, and the principles by which God rules through Christ, the King of Kings, the principles that the kings under the King of Kings exist according to are revealed in the scriptures as well, because Jesus is also the King of Kings, and every nation is established underneath his kingship, and those kings have to kiss the Son, in order to continue to exist, or he will destroy them, right? He will replace them. He will, you know, put the people that he wants in there by whatever means he deems necessary. Well, that means that the history of every nation is also a an institutional history in relationship to Christ as the King of Kings, and so we can learn the principles by which he rules, studying the history of nations as well. And it's not the same sort of infallible establishment. Those histories are not understood in the same sort of infallible way, but there's still real revelation of the rulership of Christ.
So then we can see when nations fall, we can ultimately say in some way they weren't kissing the sun.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
he destroyed them.
Right.
Boy, that's going to be a hard pill for a lot of even Reformed Christians to be able to swallow. And this is where it gets interesting, because we were just talking about how in the Reform side they have more of a institutional understanding, and yet I can see a lot of people not liking the fact that you just said every nation is under Christ as an establishment, like it's established under the ruleship of Christ. And so much as they seem to honor Christ in that, they'll be blessed, and they really seem not to, he'll destroy them and replace them. That's changing the whole idea and narrative of what history is, what nations are, and the context of the whole story. But that's the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and I don't think that's very that's not I don't think that are there a lot of people that would argue with that? I don't think that's
I think maybe in the general sense probably wouldn't really want to come. I think some, yes, but there are implications that follow from that because of that statement, right? I happen to think that's why the church is an international institution, is because of the rulership of Christ. And so they don't have a jurisdiction of where they can't go. And that can only be true if Christ is Lord of all, right? Literally has all the authority in heaven and on earth, right? You can't, otherwise you don't have any authority to go and do that, right? And so the fact that you can go to all the nations is because Christ has to have and we're not talking about spiritual, we're talking about legal
authority. Yeah.
He has a legal authority over all the nations.
He's the legal ruler of every nation because of his genealogy, because of the anointing of the Holy Spirit, because of the establishment at the right hand of the Father, because of and so this is where the prophets are so important, because you have Isaiah making legal declarations about, you have Ezekiel and Isaiah making legal declarations about the Son of David and his authority, and why Cyrus, being called the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and being given the throne of David, is so important, because that means when Jesus takes the throne of David back, the imperial authority of Cyrus has been added to the throne of David as a right of the throne of David by God, right? By divine establishment. So when Jesus is revealed, when blind Bartimaeus says, "Behold the Son of David," for the first time publicly about Jesus, he is saying that this is the true emperor, right? Because Cyrus's throne, which is now sat in by the Caesar, because Cyrus, his throne was taken by let's see if I can get these right. The Medo-Persians. The Medo-Persians throne was taken by the Greeks. The Greek throne was taken by the Romans. The Roman throne then was extended, and the Caesar was sitting on it. But he was currently sitting in Cyrus's throne. So, but Cyrus's throne was added to the throne of David. And so now when Jesus takes the throne of David is an imperial throne. Right? So Jesus being called the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, the great shepherd, which was Cyrus's title, they're saying Jesus is the rightful king of all the nations. So when Jesus then ascends into heaven and is anointed by the Holy Spirit on the day of Pentecost, and then the Spirit of God flows down his beard onto his body, like it says in Psalm 133, you have Jesus being established as the true emperor of all, legally established that way. So Brother Andrew, when the Russians tell all the Christians they have to leave, and Brother Andrew sneaks back in and to share the gospel, he has every legal right to do that. He can, because the king of Russia, Jesus, has told him, I'm the king here and I want to be honored here. And so I know they're throwing you out, but you don't have to listen. So he can walk in. And the same sort of thing with the Christians that sneak into North Korea right now. You've got,
it's the Abigail move, right? It's like you're not functioning as the real as authority properly should.
Right. So it's submission. We're taking on the mission of Christ, even if the authority over us is saying, no, we're not going to follow Jesus anymore. Well, we submit to our authorities sometimes by ignoring them.
That's right? Such a good point, dude. As you said that, one of the things that everybody wanted to bring out during COVID was, you're not submitting to the authorities, but they got submission wrong. Right. Like, no, you're not submitting to the rightful authority.
So my pastor, when the governor said you can't sing, he started the church by saying, okay, the governor told us we're not allowed to sing, but Jesus hasn't given us permission to not sing. So you need to sing extra loud this Sunday,
so that the governor can hear you.
Right? And we our church wrote a letter saying we were disobeying. Right? We tried to say, look, if you need to do something about it, come do something about it. But we're going to continue following the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, even if you
gangster move. If you need to come do something about it, then come do something about it.
Right.
But let me tell you what we're not gonna do.
And one of the blessings was seeing all the old men with gray hair for about a month sat by the back door, so that if the police showed up, they would just offer to be the first ones arrested. You're going to have to arrest grandpa before you're going to get to anyone else in the congregation. And being able to tell my kids, that's who you want to be when you grow up.
Yep.
So those old men right there are an example of what it looks like, because they're sitting by the back door saying, if you show up and you're going to arrest us, you're going to arrest all the frail old men first, because they're strong in spirit. I mean, it was really good for our congregation, and because it gave us an opportunity to say, where is our allegiance? Where does our allegiance really lie? And our allegiance to you as an authority is a sub allegiance to Christ.
I think COVID ended too soon. It was one of the best Gnosticism. As far as the idea of history versus idealism, there wasn't a better hit at Gnosticism than COVID. Right? Like, I don't know of anything in time in most recent history that made people go back to history and start thinking about the tangible realities and where it's on the ground that we're touching, the education. All of it just it's kind of like seeing the Russian in Rocky IV start to bleed. It's like, oh, Oh,
Well,
he's
I
a
think it was
man.
in kind of a technical sense, it was apocalyptic. It was which means
Yes.
a moment of revelation.
Yes.
Right? The curtains were pulled back, and you realized, oh, we've got stuff to work on. And you also saw some, uh, you know, you saw some really amazing realignments between, like, all of a sudden you couldn't say, well, there's us Presbyterians over here, and then there's those charismatics over there, there those Pentecostals and those evangelicals, and you started to say, oh, well, there are there the allegiances all got kind of reshuffled, and I think it was a huge blessing to see folks, because I think it's really easy to think according to the flesh about denominations. Like,
Mm-hmm.
well, we organize this way, you organize that way. Here's why we're superior and you're inferior. And then all of a sudden you see some of the Pentecostals stand and some don't stand, and you go, oh yeah, that's right. Here's this realignment happening of people that say, well, but Jesus told us to do this. What, this is what we're doing till he gets back. Why would we stop? And you go, oh man, that was such a blessing to see. And you had evangelical churches that just said, I don't understand why are some of you not doing this, like this does. And so it, at least here in Spokane, it was a huge reshuffling.
I feel like there's some more layers to go through on this with liberalism and Christianity and history versus Christianity. I don't think, because right now the biggest conversations that are happening inside the conservative world is the question of an accurate telling and narrative of history. And there's a reason for that. I think everybody is getting into the weeds, and I don't mind that in the details. I think there's a reason for that too, and I think we should go through that. But then there's a reason why that's happening. So you have the breakdown of institutions, and then you have to examine everything the institutions have taught you, and then you have to figure out what the truth is. But you're doing it all now without an institution. And the institutions themselves have not come out to say, oh, this is the most accurate telling of history. It's individuals, because we don't trust the institutions anymore. But what that can do, and I don't mind challenging the idea of a bad narrative. I think we need to. But I wish we had, like right now, we're grouping around people we trust as much as possible and building institutions around individuals instead of the institutions themselves being the thing to instruct us. I think that could be dangerous, right?
Yeah.
I think that turns into a massive form of tribalism in one sense, right? But it's because we don't trust institutions.
Right. And I think some of that's because we think institutions failed us. But honestly, I think we retreated from our institutions also. So,
they kind of did.
Yeah, you got both happening. But I think we often don't build institutions. We start podcasts, right? And think that we're doing
hold it. Don't do that. We're at the end of the show. Don't do that. Can an argument be made that podcasts are a new institution?
Absolutely. If you do them the same way a newspaper was could be an institution, or it could be
I'm sorry, Joe Rogan's an institution, bro. Joe Rogan.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So it can become an institution. When this is
ugly.
Daily printing press was invented, I think we should be really looking at the foundation of radio when it started. I just finished a great book called The Victorian Internet about the telegraph, the establishment of the telegraph. It's really helpful thinking through what we're going through right now with social media. So I would totally recommend it. It's called The Victorian Internet was the name of the book. And it just goes through the technology, which was really neat to learn about, but then the effect that the Telegraph had on society was really cool. I read a great book on the newspaper revolution. I can't remember the name of the book now, but it was really good. And just thinking through when have we gone through communication revolutions before, and what was the effect? And there were like 500 newspapers at one point in New York, but a lot of them never got out of being pamphlets in the sense of, we're just responding to whatever news story. We print a pamphlet. Here's our take on that news story. That person started the Times published the news. We responded to it with a pamphlet. Those pamphleteer newspapers didn't survive because they never became institutions. They never became journalistic institutions. And a lot of podcasts live in that pamphleteering phase, and they never shift to becoming an institution, a business that serves its base, or business that serves its customers. I mean, it has a base instead of customers, a business that serves its customers and establishes itself as an institution that can grow and expand and become more than it is. And so I think we've got a lot about institutional establishment, and which means reading business books and reading.
So then, you think we're in the time where institutions are being reorganized, and the idea of what they are because of technology is being challenged?
Yep, I think so. I think it's a huge opportunity to when we're prepared, and ready to go to start institutions, and have a formative effect on a lot of individuals and families, and eventually, I think, even nations and churches. I think.
So the thing really to do in this, we got to talk about this another time, but it seems like I want to end with this. One of the things to think about is kind of like what you're talking about with Dan Cathy, which is, what is the best way to help form humans, and what am I skilled at doing that can help teach this thing that makes them better humans, right? So then he's like, I can make a chicken sandwich. And and so
a great recipe.
He creates an institution to help form man a particular type of way.
Yeah.
Okay.
But you've got to build a successful institution, right? A successful business. This is one of the things that in the Christian film industry is they start all these nonprofits, and a nonprofit doesn't need to be a successful institution to accomplish its role, but that means it doesn't become a human forming institution. Now, some nonprofits do. Sometimes that does work, but the assumption is that the product is going to be the influential thing, not the institution. And so we don't need an institution if we can get a product out as a nonprofit. And I think that isn't historically the way things have worked. The institution ends up becoming formative